Minnesota Human Rights Act was enacted in 1967 to protect the civil rights of Minnesotans and prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, religion, and disability in employment, housing, and education. Senator Bobby Joe Champion is the Senate author of a bill that would add hair texture and style within the category of race, and I spoke with him this week. The bill is called the Crown Act, which stands for Creating a Respectful and Open World of Natural Hair. Why does hair need a special mention?
Thank you so much for having me on. And I always count it a privilege to come on your show and discuss these important policy initiatives with you. To your question, it requires a special mention because we've seen nationally, not just in the state of Minnesota, the need to make sure that we create an open and respectful workplace and also school, right? We've seen some issues in school where individuals who prefer to wear their natural hair are sometimes ostracized, or they're made to feel as if their cultural expression or their natural being is not a preferred look, right? And so by making sure that we have this policy in place, just reassures them that we care, that the state of Minnesota care, and we want employers and school educators and others to know that we care. So we want to create that space in a respectful way to be as inclusive and as accepting of others.
Now, I'm sure you've heard from people who have experienced this kind of discrimination. Can you provide one or two brief examples?
Absolutely. Remember in 2018, not here in the city of in the state of Minnesota, but across the country, there was a wrestler who was going for a championship or involved in a wrestling match. He had dreads in his hair, and the referee told him that if he did not cut his dreads off, he could not wrestle. So he would have to end up forfeiting, even though his hair length was the same, if not shorter, than some of his other classmates or other colleagues or other teammates. He was forced right at that moment on the side of the mat to cut his hair. I know another example. In fact, when I was on WCCO, Jerlyn Steele also mentioned a situation that happened with one of her relatives, where they had braids and there was some reluctance or pushback around that. And so those are just two situations. I can go on and on and on to show that it has happened in so many settings where nationally now different states are saying and recognizing that we need to do something about it. So in fact, there's 17, I think it's 17 other states that has adopted the Crown Act or some, similarity to it or something similar to it.
So how will having hair and hairstyles spelled out within the framework of Minnesota's Human Rights Act help those claiming a violation of their rights?
Number one, the biggest thing that I think that the Human Rights Office does is with employers and others, teach about and talk about the importance of acceptance and culture and hair. This is not about penalizing someone. We try to alleviate that. So the ability for businesses and others to be educated about this issue will help them understand that perhaps they might have a blind spot, right? And so I think by spelling it out makes it clear. It doesn't leave this whole notion of people not understanding. Clarity is good for the soul, I often say, right? So I'd rather be certain than cautious. I'd rather be clear than fumbling. So I think it just provides clarity, and it will allow the employers to understand. The folks who are on the other side of the equation also feel like they're valued as well.
Now, I understand that the primary focus here is natural hair and cultural hairstyles, but I wonder, does it extend to all hairstyles? For example, my daughter wanted to dye her hair purple, and she's young and it's fun, and she did. But I was concerned when she asked about the ramifications with teachers or peers, and she's a child, but if she were out looking for her first job, would somebody not hire her because they have decided that purple hair is not appropriate? Does this extend then to all hairstyles?
So the short answer is no, is that this is really for around culture, right? Who you are, who you were born with. It's sort of like if you were born with blue eyes. We would not want someone to discriminate against another person just because they have blue eyes, right? That's something that's natural, and they should be able to express themselves and not have to wear contacts in order to be accepted. So it's cultural and natural. Secondly, I don't believe that hair color is cultural. Although I believe that people should have the freedom to wear their hair any color that they want, right? And not be judged, but to be judged on their skills and qualifications. So to me, that's important. Here's the other thing that I'm also asked. Well, what if a person's hair length interferes with safety in some shape, form, or fashion? Does it protect that? No, because if you have a policy that is for everyone, right? Then that's different than allowing, let's say, my white peer to wear long hair and is straight, but you won't allow me to wear long hair because I have dreads or I have some natural hairstyle. So I think we're getting to that as opposed to complicating this matter. But it's really about, even in the state of Minnesota, when we think in terms of employers and others that come to our great state, I want people to be judged on their skills and qualifications because we need to diversify our businesses. Just think in terms of the footprint and where we are going as a state and how we want to remain globally competitive. This is just a good business decision as well. So if you're one of those individuals who says, hey, I'm having business shortages, worker shortages, I want to make sure whether we're at 3M or General Mills or Target or some other place, and we want to attract and retain good talent, this is the way to do that, is to create an environment that's welcoming and diverse. So I wouldn't want your daughter to be judged on the fact that she decided to get her hair colored. Like if I decide to color my hair blonde, I should be able to do that, right?
So this bill did pass the House on a vote of 104 to 25, so it had great bipartisan support. Will you get a hearing in the Senate?
That's the $100,000 question. But let me tell you, I'm doing everything within my power to get a hearing in the Senate. I've had some discussions already with Senator Matthews, who chairs the Civil Law Division, which oversees the Department of Human Rights, and so this bill would be under their jurisdiction. I provided for him background information to talk about how this has come to be and why it's so necessary. I've also had some discussions with Senator Jeremy Miller, who is the Senate Majority Leader, to talk about this as well as other colleagues, anyone and everyone who I think will listen, from Julie Rosen to Senator Benson to Senator Housley, because it may not be something that they face every single day, but there are members of my community that does. And my sharing of that should be welcomed and understood, and we should be given a platform to further enlighten not only just the chair, but the rest of the committee, and create a space for inclusion to be a part of our fabric, the fabric of Minnesota.
Now, I only have about a minute left, but I want to ask you this one question, and hopefully we can go into it in more depth another time. But you are the chief Senate author of a bill called the African American Family Preservation Act, which was introduced last session and still awaits a hearing. Can you just provide a brief overview of what this bill seeks to do?
This bill seeks to preserve families, African American families, by not letting a system that is broken, better known as child protection or child welfare, to interfere in a way that is biased, right? So we have seen, and it's well recorded, that Black children are much more easily removed from their households, and even when it comes to a removal and placing that child with a member of their family or kinship. That doesn't happen for various reasons, because some of the policies are very biased and seeks to exclude participation as opposed to include participation. So it just really seeks to say, how do we write this system in such a way that is fair and that we can make sure that we value family? Why? Because when there's a healthy, intact family, kids have better outcomes, families have better outcomes, and that's a benefit for Minnesotans. So that's what we really seek to do, is make sure that we create an opportunity for African American families to stay together and remove those barriers that we know empirically has been problematic.
Senator Bobby Joe Champion, it's so nice to see you, and thank you for your time.
It's so good to see you, and thank you again. Thank you to the listening audience. I look forward to seeing you again soon.